Hello everybody, it's Peter with an I, S-T-A-W-A-R-T. Welcome to segment 23 of, I don't know, the Dark Tower, I guess?
As they entered the house, laughing and talking about the events of the struggle and the strategies they used, Frank switched on the lamp. The old creepy-looking one that antique collectors would love to have, but little kids would hate to have around. Frank noticed something in the adjacent sitting room.
And so this big guy with the green jersey comes at me from the side, but I'm looking at the other two,
continued Potty Mouth as he put his coat in the closet. But he was trying to identify what was reflected in the plate glass mirror of the next room. It looked like a bouquet of red and black flowers.
And I knew if I got hit in the back of the head, it would be lights out for me. So I backed up, see, in the defensive stance.
Potty Mouth, preoccupied with telling the story, looked around for the old flannel he liked to wear around the house. As he continued his account, he started to head into the sitting room. Just before he rounded the corner, Frank saw the bouquet of flowers rotate. It wasn't a bouquet of red and black flowers at all. It was the flesh of a head and body that had been barbecued. The face looked at Frank. Its eyes opened wide. Frank was unable to move as Potty Mouth rounded the corner. Potty Mouth stood there, face to face with the ghoulish creature. He was unable to breathe. All he was able to do was produce a long, white, curly hair that grew out of the top of his scalp. Frank's first impulse was to immediately run straight out through the door. Before he did, he hesitated just long enough to clutch Potty Mouth's shirt. Between the shock of standing inches from the fleshy face of a demon and the suddenness of being pulled backward, Potty Mouth lost his footing. He laid against Frank's legs as Frank desperately tried to work the old brass knob to the door that had just closed. The gory beast stepped forward with its skinless hands raised, their yellow bones exposed and fingertips chipped and broken after decades of scraping at the lining of a coffin as its body burned with caustic pesticides that poisoned the ground. Frank got the door open and accidentally knocked Potty Mouth's head with it. But Potty Mouth didn't even notice as he lay paralyzed on the floor, watching the monster draw closer. Every nerve in his body was firing like an automated machine gun, making the signals useless. And his brain seemed to close in on itself, as if to huddle in the fetal position, like a sun crouched into a small supernova. Frank grabbed the chest of his shirt. There was no time to help him to his feet, as Frank pulled his helpless body like a sack of potatoes. Potty Mouth could feel the texture of the moist, gummy flesh of its hand touch his exposed belly. He couldn't even look. He could only stare upward and gasp as he was dragged onto the porch and down the stairs to freedom. Funny note, normal people would say or scream a swear word at this point. Potty Mouth, the king, whinnied fudge. Interesting note. Get up! Howled Frank. Potty Mouth shook his head to gain control, and the world seemed less like a dream. The two of them went into the garage. They stood with their backs against the wall, breathing heavily, sweat dripping in the cool night. They needed to keep on moving because the creaking of the wooden porch step indicated the ghoul was in a slow, menacing pursuit. If they had time to draw a schematic of the garage and the surrounding premises, make and measure a few lines with a ruler, and do a few calculations, they would have found the best choice would have been to run out through the front of the garage, out through the gate, and toward the main road. But the situation was so frantic, they sought refuge in the closest thing they could find, and quickly closed the lid. Neither of them were sure whether or not they could open the trunk of the old car from the inside. Frank damned himself for just choosing the nearest hiding place around, and wished they could have found a different spot, where they weren't so confined. Frank wondered why they couldn't have just picked a cabinet to hide in, or hid under the car. They held their breath and listened. The silence was almost worse than if there was a crashing sound outside. At least if the creature was making a ruckus, they could tell when it was gone. They waited there, motionless. Potty Mouth's knee was killing him, the way it was bent in an awkward position, but he'd rather have his knee do it than the monster. Neither of them wanted to open the trunk, but between the growing pain in his knee and the both of them using up all the air in the confined space, they needed to make a move. "Shall we go?" whispered Potty Mouth as quickly and quietly as possible. In the sheer darkness, Frank had already found the latch mechanism and had begun working on it. Its metal hook popped, but he hesitated before letting the spring-charged lid float upward. He let the pressure off with his fingers, and it cracked just enough to let the thin line of yellow tungsten light break through the seal. But the garage light wasn't turned on when they jumped in the trunk. Frank's hold on the latch wasn't firm, and he couldn't hold the lid down. Before he could find any clefts of metal to pull the trunk closed, the lid slowly rose like a curtain, exposing the slimy red torso, the gangrenous chest, the exposed larynx, and finally the grinning face that looked down on them with excited, evil delight. It screamed and came at them. As soon as they flinched, it was gone, disappeared into thin air. They laid there, shell-shocked. Frank finally spoke. What? He took a moment to move his tongue around, to work some saliva into his dry mouth. "What was that?" he asked at last. Potty Mouth cleared his throat a little and sniffed into his sleeve. "That was the reason I got this house so cheap," he replied. "When the realtors told me it was haunted, I thought they were full of it." "Evidently they weren't," Frank pointed out. Potty Mouth clicked. "Yeah," he agreed. A lot of old houses, even brand new ones, have their imperfections. Some have leaky pipes. Some have water in the basement. Some have horrible, violent demons. Buyer beware. Frank noticed a thread laying across his chest. When he tried to flick it away, he found it was a hair. A long, curly white hair that was still attached to Potty Mouth's scalp. It had grown in response to sheer terror. Frank gave it a little tug. "Ding dong! Is anyone home?" he joked. "Yeah, a horrible frickin' monster," he replied. They laughed as they laid mashed in the trunk cavity, recouping from the fright. "Didn't you notice anything strange in the past few weeks you've been here?" asked Potty Mouth, who had witnessed mildly strange and spooky goings-on almost every other day since he'd lived there. "Well, I heard ghastly moaning," admitted Frank, "but I thought it was just my stomach." They laughed. Frank squeezed out a little oink, which made them laugh harder. He squeezed out another little oink, and soon they were wheezing with laughter. Frank tried to squeeze out another one, but he was too bold, and his grin flopped into a look of exploratory horror. "I think I need to go to the bathroom," he said discreetly. Being mashed in there with Frank's butt near his face suddenly became very uncomfortable, and Potty Mouth wanted out, right quick. Chapter 23. The hues of gold and copper mixed as the sun shined over the horizon for the first time that day. The water looked like liquid bronze. Frank had the impulse to throw a rock and skip it over the water,